Hello everybody, for today's lesson we're going to be going over night operations, supplemental oxygen, and pressurization systems. For our references for today, we're going to be using Chapter 13, Chapter 7, and Chapter 17 of the PHAC. So starting off, night operations, just quickly, night operations are mainly VFR operations. There can be IFR, but the focus is VFR operations and how much changes when we don't have daylight. Our eyes rely on daylight a lot just to be able to see what's happening, see what's focusing on. And while we do get some night perception, which I'll explain later, we still have to understand how different operations are when we lose so much of what we can see. So starting off, the visual deficiencies, mainly night myopia. At night, blue wavelengths of light prevail in the visible portion of the spectrum. Therefore, slightly nearsighted individuals viewing blue-green light at night may experience blurred vision. Even pilots with perfect vision find that image sharpness decreases as pupil diameter decreases. Along with that, astigmatism, hyporia, there you go, and presbyopia. All of these are just different conditions that affect people that are worsened at night, and you can see a main part of myopia is difference in light contrast when you're going in night versus during the day. With our G1000s, if you're flying those, the brightness can be really really bright. So when you're focusing on night operations, and you have that bright light, it's going to harm your night vision. As we're flying through at night, if you dim those down and let your eyes adjust to the night, you can actually see better. And that's why some pilots use red flashlights. Red flashlights are different from white flashlights because the white burns, I believe, the rods in our eyes. We'll explain that soon. Where white burns that, red doesn't, because it's a lower wavelength in the visible spectrum, which means our eyes stay safe, and that allows us to see at night. So here we go. The eye vision is primarily the result of light striking a photosensitive layer called the retina at the back of the eye. The retina is composed of light-sensitive cones and rods. These cones are the cones in the eye perceive images best when the light is bright, while the rods work best in low light. The pattern of light strikes the cones and rods is transmitted as electrical impulses by the optic nerve to the brain, where these signals are interpreted as an image. Again, our bodies are very complex machines. So these cones work best at bright lights. Right here, cones allow color perception by sensing red, blue, and green light. This focuses the image and is where details are best seen. However, do not function well in darkness, which explains why color is not seen as vividly at night during the day. So that's why during night you can see colors really well, and when you're looking out, let's say you're flying over the farms and the fields and all that, you look down, you're not really going to see green as you would during the day. You're just going to see darker shades of black and gray, and you're not going to see that color. Rods, however, work best in low light and sense images in black and white. These rods are not directly located behind the pupil, and they're responsible for peripheral vision as well, which will explain how we do our nightly scans. In low light, the cones lose much of their function while rods become more perceptive. The eye sacrifices sharpness for sensitivity. We lose a lot of detail during the night, but we're able to actually see things because of these rods. And again, night vision. So, I must have missed it, but essentially, again, these rods can get damaged when we're looking at bright white lights. So as we're flying through, the last thing you want to do is turn on lights, turn on the PFD really bright, MFD really bright. You want to focus on using white lights, sensing the, and if you're doing the aircraft and you're checking it, when the lights are flashing, just check to the side. You could see the light projecting against the walls during night, so you don't have to look fully at the light bulb. And you want to keep your night vision, because as you're flying, it's something that we really need for flying VFR. So for our scan, to break it down, it essentially is a left-right scan focusing on portions and using a lot of peripheral vision to see what moves outside our vision. If we're focusing on things due to the night illusions that we do have, it's going to be hard to really focus on something without it moving towards us, autokinesis, other things like that, where we lose that perception. However, we're using our peripheral, that's going to work best on showing us where something is. So as I'm going through, another thing to note is the aircraft lighting in general night operations. So night lights during the ground, red, green, white, blue, all that. That's going to be in the aim, but essentially taxiways are blue. And you're going to be focusing on those night lights along with whatever tower leads you to for your takeoffs and landings. And then the aircraft lighting. So pilot side is red, co-pilot side is going to be green, the rear is the white. So when you're seeing other aircraft flying through the air, you want to focus on these and say, okay, is he to my right? Is he to my left? Am I to his right? Is he to my left? Am I behind him? In front of him? And using that to gauge it instead of staring at it and saying, is it moving towards me, moving away from me? Because again, at night, you're staring at an aircraft, especially at night, you're going to lose the background, you're going to lose the horizon, whatever's around it, and you're going to be focusing on that. If you don't have a reference to gauge where that is or where it's coming from, it's going to be almost impossible to tell whether or not it's going towards you, away from you, to the side of you, as it's going through, which is why we need to remember these aircraft position lights and why we have them in the first place. Alrighty. So again, there's multitudes of them, night illusions, cockpit lights, all that, things that the PHAC talks about, but I'll leave that for the PHAC. We're going to go to the next section, which is going to be the pressurization system. Pressurization is used for high altitude aircraft for two reasons. Aircraft fly at high altitudes for two reasons. Consumes less fuel for a given airspeed than it does at the same speed at a lower altitude, because the aircraft is more efficient, and it avoids bad weather and turbulence. However, we're not built to survive at 30,000 feet, 40,000 feet. So what we have is pressurization systems within the aircraft that keep the air within the cabin pressurized to different altitudes, where we're not breathing that outside air and that outside pressure. So we're not dealing with the outside pressure. So pressurization, higher altitudes allow, yes, less fuel. However, higher altitudes means less breathable oxygen. So we have two solutions to this. Either we use supplemental oxygen or we pressurize the aircraft. Pressurization systems contain the cabin, flight compartment, and baggage compartments, all within a sealed unit, excuse me, to contain air pressure. So we could see this in figure 7-40. It has the different systems, the cabin heat valve, air scoops, heat shroud, heat exchanger. So what they use is bleed air. Turbine engines use bleed air. Superchargers can also be used, and piston aircraft often have turbochargers that compress this air for its use for pressurization. And it's all controlled through a cabin pressure control system, which controls pressure regulation, pressure relief, so relieving those pressures, vacuum relief, cabin altitude selection, which some can be chosen to certain altitudes, where you're flying at you're flying above that altitude, but you're setting it for 8,000, you're setting it for 10,000, you could set it for 2,000. As for dumping air, this is done through a regulator, an outflow valve, and safety valve. So we'll get into this later, but there are different issues when it comes to pressurization, and when we lose pressurization, what can happen. But controls are set to maintain pressure and to make sure differential pressure doesn't exceed the aircraft structure. It's another thing we have to focus on is if the pressure is too light on the inside, or too high on the inside and too light on the outside, we could have issues with the cabin structure. The safety valve allows external air to enter when the ambient pressure exceeds the cabin pressure, so that's why we have that safety valve. And then, essentially, as air flows through, it's going to enter the air scoops into the cabin heat valve to cool down, the heat shroud to cool down that hot air. Because that air, again, remember, is going through the bleed system, is getting hyper-compressed by turbochargers and superchargers, so that air is going to be really hot. As it cools down, it's going to go through the heat exchanger, the heat shroud, and enter the flow control. As it's going through, that's what's going to lead it, go through multiple filters, go into the cabin. We breathe it, we exhale it out, keep it going, and then that leads down to the outflow valve and the safety valve. The outflow valve keeps that air circulating so that way the air doesn't get stale and keeps it fresh as we're flying through. All right, awesome. And then, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about. Yeah, but essentially, pressurization controls the air within the aircraft to allow us to feel comfortable within that aircraft and allow it to perform how it performs. Smaller aircraft don't have those pressurization systems. Our Cessnas, no matter how high they'll be able to get, don't have pressurization. So what happens when you do reach these high altitudes and don't have pressurization, you have to use supplemental oxygen instead to be able to control how much oxygen you have in the aircraft and in your body. Oxygen has its own different medical things. So hypoxia, we talked about that last time, and I wanted to also mention time of useful consciousness. So when we do have depressurization, we have different altitudes, and that affects the time of useful consciousness we have before we essentially lose control of our bodies and black out. So it's important to understand this, and in high aircraft, when you're having these instant hypoxia situations like decompression, or even you lose your oxygen mask, you have to realize you only have so much time to respond, and how are you going to respond? Different aircraft have autopilot systems that allow it to descend down to safer altitudes. Other than that, you have your supplemental oxygen. If you lose that, then you have to start at least a controlled descent down to safer altitude to keep your useful consciousness up and to be able to survive without blacking out. So I skipped this part. Let me go back, but we're going to talk about the different pressurization or decompressions and depressurizations. So you have three main types: explosive, rapid, and then gradual depressurization. Gradual depressurization, I like to think of it like the VSI is a slow leak where that pressure altitude slowly getting lost. We set it at 8,000. It's been slowly ticking up to 10, 12. I haven't noticed, and that's going to be one of the the most deadly ones, because you're not going to realize unless you're really focusing. Okay, this is wrong. This has been going up. We need to immediately react. But as that's going on, you have cyanosis, the effects of hypoxia. You're getting euphoric even, so you might just miss that as it's slowly creeping up, and then it's too late to respond. Rapid decompression and explosive decompression both focus on how fast air escapes the lungs and the damage that does to your lungs. So explosive decompressurization has I believe about 0.2 seconds for the lungs to decompress, less than a second, which means those lungs are going to collapse almost and immediately break and shatter, which is going to be dangerous, obviously, physical damage, but again, it's depressurization as well, so you have that going on. Rapid decompressurization is similar, so it does have that, but your lungs aren't going to immediately collapse and immediately break down. You still lose all that pressurization, so you still need to react immediately, and usually that comes from cabin doors flying out. All right. And then let's go ahead and go back to oxygen systems. So first off, the oxygen laws. No person may operate above 12,500 feet MSL in cabin pressure, up to and including 14,000, unless minimum required flight crew is provided and uses supplemental oxygen once past 30 minutes in those altitudes. Above 14,000, minimum required flight crew is provided and uses supplemental oxygen during the entire duration of that flight, or during the entire duration of that flight time, and above 15,000, each occupant of the aircraft is provided with supplemental oxygen. They don't have to use it, they just need to be provided it. So with this 91-211, we have different types of oxygen masks and different types of oxygen systems for our people, or for who's flying. The cannula is a nice, comfortable system, or nice, comfortable supplemental oxygen system. However, it's not a full-face oxygen mask that covers the nose and mouth, so that can't be used for these flights where it is completely required. You also have different crew masks, Panger masks, which are the cups with the rubber mask, and oral nasal, which covers the nose and mouth, and those are required for the crew. You also have different demand types. How is that oxygen getting to us? You have diluter demand, which is supplied oxygen when we inhale through the mask, mimicking cabin air and oxygen. You have pressure demand, which works similarly but is based upon the pressure of the cabin, which reacts and responds to it. You have continuous flow, which is what we give the passengers, simply a mask that goes down and continually shoots oxygen, letting them exhale it and inhale it at their own pace. And electrical pulse demand, which is based on our electrical pulse, usually the finger reader, and checks how much oxygen we need as we're flying through. All right, and I believe that's it.